Hello, and welcome to this special edition of DevOps Chat. You'll notice I'm not your familiar host. David Daly is taking a rest this time. I'm Chris Bainham-Hughes, and I'll obviously be attempting to generate the same kind of pizzazz that David achieves on these videos. But today I'm going to be talking about automation platforms with Mark Phillips of Red Hat. So Mark, welcome to DevOps Chat.
Hello.
Hello. Right, well, I guess just to get started, Mark, I was wondering if you could give me a brief introduction of yourself and a bit of a background as to what's brought you in today as our expert.
I can indeed. Well, hey everybody. Yeah, I'm Mark Phillips. I'm a product manager at Ansible by Red Hat. I've been with the company for just under 3 years. Wasn't always a product manager. When I first joined the company, I was the first person to join in EMEA, so I was doing all sorts of things. And one of the things I was doing was consultancy, which was off of the back of pretty much the rest of my career. So I've spent about 20 years doing infrastructure engineering, predominantly automation. Pretty much every part of my career has been around automating anything and everything that I do, trying to get the computers to do the heavy lifting, basically. So I've got quite a wide-ranging experience of automating servers, networks, security, and I've done homegrown tools and probably most of the common automation tools that people use today. I've used at some point or another.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, that's fantastic. Well, fantastic, obviously, because that's what we're talking about today, and also in line with Ansible Fest coming up this week, or rather next week.
Yes, next Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday, I think.
Yeah. So we'll hopefully we'll be doing the chat. This chat will go out at just at the end of the day whilst everyone's at the bar. So we'll see whether we get some sensible or non-sensible answers,
or drive people to drink.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, automation platforms, they've sort of really become really ubiquitous within the DevOps community, the likes of Chef and Puppet, SaltStack, and of course Red Hat's own Ansible platform. So I'm wondering if you could give us a brief summary for the uninitiated as to why anybody would want to use such a platform.
Yeah, I mean it's like so many things with life, as populations have expanded, we did things like mechanized farming, for example, because you can't feed 7 billion people by having somebody with a cow dragging, manual furrowing equipment through a field or something. That kind of thing doesn't scale. You need to have automation. You need to have machinery to help you augment one person or augment multiple people to be able to do something. And I think with this whole DevOps ethos that's coming about, the foundations of DevOps are basically communication. It's about people being able to talk to one another to fit together, say, delivery pipelines, where a developer can develop a piece of software, but then it can get to production. And along the way, it doesn't need lots of people having to point, click, and things like that. So this whole idea of a dev team talking to an ops team, and the two of them deciding how the software will get from development into production is then underpinned by automation. We use automation tools to help that pipeline move along smoothly. It's akin to a factory production line, if you like. Lots and lots of different ways of using those tools to augment people, but I think that's fundamentally why automation now, despite that's what computers have always been about, is trying to do things, to help humans do them faster or help humans do more things. The DevOps movement is actually accelerating the idea of automation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think critical to kind of increasing that speed and quality of release is the technical environment itself. I'm certain that anybody listening to this will know that getting hold of environments can be a long and torturous process, especially if there's no automation. It can be a bit of a nightmare, days or weeks, etc. So And one of the things I've blogged about in the past is the importance of having a known state of your environment. Can you talk us through what that means and why it's so important?
Yeah, so I think most of my sort of engineering career prior to joining Ansible was based around automating infrastructures and automating environments. So I did a lot of work for way over a decade on doing Unix server builds and ensuring that the server that you got was consistent with the server that you'd had previously, and making sure that they all look the same. Because the thing about if you go and stick a CD into a server and go and build it, and somebody types according to a list of instructions, that's fine. You'll get to where you need to be, but the chances are that it'll take longer. And if you type something wrong, then the result probably isn't going to be consistent. And the thing about consistency with environments is that you then have trust. You also have supportability. You know that what you're dealing with is going to be what you've dealt with before. It's going to behave the way that you want. I mean, take, for example, financial systems, trading platforms, and things like that. You can't go having a random build for a trading platform to sit on, because there's awfully big numbers involved, and you don't want those big numbers going missing. Typically, you want to know exactly where those big numbers are and how they're going to behave. So you use automation. You let the computers do what they do best, which is ensuring something is a 0 or a 1, and you then have a known state. You have a known good state. You have a trustworthy, confidence-inspiring platform to be able to do your job. And typically what we're all using technology for is to do something for customers. We're trying to deliver business benefit. We're trying to deliver value to the rest of life. So, having consistency with those sort of things, automation is key to getting that consistency and that trust.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I often surprise is that actually DevOps is as much about what you, or doing things quickly, is about much as what you don't do as much what you do. So I think, if you can strip out the wastage that you have. So, the old classic of, something's broken, and the environment guys turn around to the developers and say, "You've broken the build," and they go, "It's not my code. It's your rubbish environment that's the problem." And if you can't, and then that obviously goes back and forth. It's not my rubbish environment. It's your rubbish code, and then that goes kind of back and forth. And once that sort of settles down, then you've got to triage where that actual bug is. And so you really, if you're not using automated platforms, and you are potentially introducing that human error, you can never really guarantee it. So you end up, the triage takes a long time because you've got to check everything, rather than being able to go, well, we can discount all this bit because we know it's exactly the same. So I think those benefits, and along with obviously the speed and the 24/7 kind of running capacity of a computer, rather than humans who unfortunately have to sleep and things like that. It's a no-brainer, really. So, interestingly though, still there's a lot of places still to adopt this, and actually kind of get it mature, I think. But,
oh yeah. I mean, I've given a talk a couple of times. First at IP Expo in London in 2015, titled "Migrating the Runbook: A Journey from Legacy to DevOps." And in fact, it's been translated into a blog post on ansible.com/blog. And I talk there about how I've actually been surprised over the last couple of years when I've been to go and see customers, and I'm still seeing them following a list of instructions on a piece of paper. I've literally seen code deployments in hedge funds where the instructions are mkdir something, change permissions on the directory, copy the code, and you just think, some poor devil is going to be tired and is going to do that one night, and they're not going to set those permissions, and that whole thing's going to break. And that this has probably been behind things like the BA failure, the RBS cache point failure a couple of years back, and things like that. You just know that has been human error somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's that whole kind of can you get it back up? The metric of success really is not how long has it all been up for. but it's how quick can you get it back up again if it falls over? Because it will fall over at some point. You know, something will happen at some point, and it will go down, and you know, or you'll need to take it down for whatever reason. And if you can't get it back with reliability, then it's kind of game over. I mean, what way we sort of stack it up is we sort of start with a clean virtual machine, then we sort of put on that OS config layer, you know, your hardened VM really, you know, all your monitoring tools and so on, and then we kind of go through the provisioner, the software stack in a vanilla form, then have another script that then configures that software stack, and then you know, firewall which will, you know, deploy your application to that software stack. You know, we find that you know, as long as we say you've got to test after each stage, make sure everything's run correctly, you know, you do get that kind of known state. So, I mean, could you walk us through where a tool like Ansible would be involved, and where the limits are, and you know, what it can do beyond what I've just described?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this wonderful notion these days, I don't know if you've heard it, of cattle versus pets, and the way that we treat our servers. I'll explain it for the viewers in case there's anybody who doesn't has not heard the phrase. The idea is that, you know, for the last 20, 30 years, we've been treating our servers like pets. When they get sick, we take them to the vet and we try and sort them out. There's a sort of modern idea with, you know, ephemeral machines, things like AWS, all these cloud services, things like that, of when something isn't behaving the way that it should be, you just replace it. And so this is the idea of modern server computing. The thing is if you're going to just tear something down and then put it back again, this is where automation comes in. You know, you can't go tearing a server down and then rebuild it from a CD by following a bunch of instructions. It isn't scalable more than anything. You know, even if you can trust somebody to hit those keys perfectly every time, it just isn't scalable. Because if you're, you know, let's say you're running a website that supports a burstable event, you know, like a TV show that has a voting thing or something like that, and you suddenly need to change your server farm from 200 servers to 500 servers. You're not going to have one chap running around a data center with a CD building 500 new servers. That just isn't practical. So this is where, you know, you just hit a button, the automation platform, boom, off it goes. Parallel does that. And, you know, pretty much all of the current crop of automation tools, things like Puppet, Chef, they were designed to do the configuration of those things. That was the idea behind them. You know, configuration management is something that's been around for many years. I remember doing automated builds and configured builds back in the 1990s in UUNet, in the ISP. I had responsibility for the whole LAN infrastructure for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at one point. And it was me and two other guys doing this. And there's absolutely no way that we could have done this just sticking CDs and typing things. So we had everything automated to the nth degree. But of course, you go to different places and then everybody has a different way of automating. Some people will write it in Perl, some people write it in Ruby, and that just isn't scalable either. And this is where things like CF Engine, Puppet, etc. came about. Was the idea was that you had a tool that could do all of these jobs that you'd do with scripting tools, but you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. So you can move to somewhere else and use the same tool. And then the skills that are involved in doing these automations expand themselves as well, and they can grow and people can learn faster. So it's all like, you know, the rest of tech, the whole of tech is now growing much, much faster, and the faster computers get and the more that we get computers to do the work, the faster we learn how to do the next thing, and so on. And that's what, you know, all of these tools do in terms of building out servers and trusted and confidence-inspiring infrastructures. And when it comes to the different kinds of tools as well, you've got different steps. You have provisioning of servers, be that virtual machines or whatever. Once you've provisioned a server, then, like you said in your example, you need to configure them. So you'll put, you know, a web server on it and configure that web server to do something, and then you'll have code deployment. And there are sort of distinct steps along the way to do that. Ansible was built from the ground up to be kind of a workflow engine, if you like. It was designed entirely in mind of modern cattle-based infrastructures, if you like. The idea was that you would talk to cloud-based infrastructures. You could provision the servers, then you could put the software on that you needed, you could configure that software, and then you could even deploy your own code to it as well. That's how it was built as a tool, and that's one of its strong points. I've got a background in other configuration management tools as well. I've used probably every single one of the most common ones that people use for many years. I used Puppet. It's pretty easy to find that I did that since the original Puppet cookbook written by John Arundel. I was the technical reviewer on it, so my bio is inside of it, so people know that I was very entrenched in that community. But when I discovered Ansible and realized that it could fill in the gaps that Puppet didn't have at the time, it was one of the things that made me realize that here's a really powerful little tool that was easy to use and could do all of those steps you're talking about. It could do the code deployment, it could do the orchestration. So I think that's one of its strong points. But all of these tools are designed to help us do these large scale things.
Yeah, I guess that leads nicely into another question actually around because obviously with your experience, obviously huge experience in the area of automation platforms, but also you're not just a sort of single. You haven't just used one tool, if you like, and kind of come through that. What do you see as the key differences between the platforms and how they actually differentiate themselves? So why would you use one over the other? If you can fill in some of the gaps there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the double-edged sword of technology, isn't it? And actually, it's a really nice thing as well. Is one of choice. Something that I'm fond of saying, and I wheel it out a lot, is there's always at least half a dozen different ways to do everything in technology, and it's true. It's entirely true. You can pick, the current crop of configuration management, orchestration, deployment tools we've got. They all do much the same sort of thing, but it's like, why would you pick one over the other? So there are lots and lots of reasons to pick a tool, and it's always based around context. So the one thing I can't do now is say, right, pick this one tool. Although, of course, I would say pick Ansible, but I can't.
There are always zealots out there.
It would be remiss of me not to, of course, but there's reasons why. I asked for the job in Ansible. In a career that's almost a quarter of a century long, I spent 20 years of it on the other side of the fence, and I've only spent 3 years of it on this side of the fence as a software vendor. And there's a reason I'm on this side of the fence now. It's because I asked to be because of this particular thing. Now, the reason why I did that is I saw that Ansible can fit into any context. Usually, whatever the scenario is that people are trying to do, Ansible can fit into it, because one of the beautiful things that Michael DeHaan did when he designed Ansible in the first place is he made it modular. And he made it so tiny and simple at its heart, extending it was very easy. And the other thing that he did is he chose to use YAML as a scaffold for the language itself. So Ansible uses what's called a playbook. And a playbook is just a list of things that you do, tasks. And they go in serial order, which is pretty much the way that people work. You try doing anything parallel as a person, you can't really.
Yeah, game over.
So other automation tools have languages that try to do clever things with parallelization. And I see where that logic is. But when it goes wrong, and it does, trying to debug it is difficult for a person, because a person just wants to go in an order of things. So serially listing the way things works better for a human mind. And the whole playbook structure is actually human readable. There's a name label that's a comment of what you're about to do. So you self-document as you go along. Now, after 7 years of using the other tool, the thing that made me convert to Ansible in an instant was this ability to have a playbook that I could give to somebody else and they could read it instantly. So the learning curve was very, very short, shallow, and fast. People could pick it up really, really quickly. Now, saying that, and in the interests of balance, you're going to get particular scenarios where no matter how easy the tool is to use, there's going to be certain things that will let people move swifter. So take, for example, you're talking to a bunch of Ruby developers. Ruby comes very, very natural to them. Chef's language of choice is Ruby. So if you stick Chef in front of a Ruby developer, they get it in an instant.
Yeah.
So contextually, it's a very sensible tool for them to get into very, very quickly. I think there's always going to be a scenario, a context that dictates what is the best tool to use. However, I would always say that Ansible is the best tool to use because it's human readable. I think that's one of the really nice things for it. It always comes down to people, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I think it was last year. It was either at Ansible Fest or the day before, and they were talking about. I think the first there was some analyst had said. I think it was Chef or Puppet was you needed a graduate education, and then the one you needed a high school education, and then Ansible you needed a kindergarten education. And at first they were really offended, and then they realised actually that's really powerful. That people can get into and read it. And I guess the other thing is the benefits around being agentless as well. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that. And
yeah, so this was one of my earliest talks for Ansible, and you can go and look this up on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, Doxlon Ansible, DOXLON, DevOps Exchange. It's a really popular meetup in London. There's regularly 300 people turn up to these meetups. There's always some really, really good talks as well, actually. I did a talk at Doxlon back in December 2014, I think. And I actually talked about Ansible being far more than configuration management. I talked about the provisioning and deployment and all that sort of stuff. But the point that I made right at the end, and I'll let people go and look it up so that they can see the ending, but was around agents. And all the years that I was doing infrastructure engineering, I'd be building servers, you'd be going through the server build, and there'd be the backup agent to stick on there. Then there'd be the monitoring agent. Then there'd probably be some other localized agent that need to be on there. And you end up with half a dozen agents sitting running on a server, and it's doing more work running the agents than it is actually running itself in the end. And to an extent, of course, I completely understand why we do the agent thing, because you want that local control on the server. And you also want a trusted transport to be able to get information from a centralized point to where that agent is. However, SSH as a transport is something that pretty much all of us use for talking to Unix servers. And SSH is very trusted. It's a very tried and tested protocol and tool. And it's really grown up, and it's got really fast, and it's got excellent capabilities like leaving connections open as well, because a lot of sort of network communications is the bringing up and tearing down of the connection really clobbers your speed. So if you can leave the connection up, you get a massive speed improvement there, and that's something that came along with SSH. So one of the other genius things that I think Michael and his early developers realized was that actually SSH is now a fantastic transport to use. Now, if we want to centralize something and we don't want to have to put agents everywhere, we could use SSH to talk to the servers, because that's what we're doing anyway. And all of a sudden, we've got massive reach from the get-go. Another talk I gave back in 2015, maybe 2016. I talked about installing Ansible there and then reaching lots of servers. And at the time when I gave this talk, if you did a yum install -y Ansible on an AWS host, it would install in 8 seconds. Once you've installed it, after that 8 seconds, as long as you have got the access to a given server, say like a username and password, whatever, you can manage it. So if you've got username and password for 100 servers, you can manage it after 8 seconds. If you've got username and passwords for 10,000 servers, you can manage them all after 8 seconds. And the really nice thing, of course, is you don't have agents to maintain on those 10,000 servers either.
Yeah.
Instant accessibility, low overhead to management. It's the simplest way to do something really, really well. It's a great quote by Einstein, which is he was supposedly said, make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. I really like that ethos, especially when it comes to being agentless. It makes total sense.
Yeah, I just think that the kind of the management and the overhead of managing those agents just, it starts to, if you can get away without having that, then, even if you didn't have the other benefits of speed, then
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Yeah. Just makes life simpler. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, something else that we found really important was, the approach we take is, we sort of take this sort of single parameterized script that we can point at whichever host, whether that's dev, test, etc., wherever that is, and it will. We can therefore, by having that single script, we know it makes it easier for us to manage and keep it in line if we do make a change somewhere along. So production has a change, we can make sure that's rippled through as far as economically viable, down that. And so that's great. But what we then find in reality is that when you get onto an enterprise scale, you don't just have one script. There's plenty of different configurations and different service stacks, etc., for the applications that you've got to run. And then the management of you just suddenly have this proliferation of scripts, and then they become there's a management overhead to that. So and also I guess in a number of industries, some by law and compliance and so on, and some actually by just good practice. You kind of want to be able to see who's done what where, so all the audit trails and so on. And so talking about Ansible specifically now, how do you make it so it doesn't become, what have we got, what has Ansible got in its locker that makes it stay manageable, basically, when those scripts?
Yep. Really, really good question. And actually, this can actually be applied to the wider picture of configuration management tools as well. In that there's always a logic portion and a data portion, and if you design the logic in certain ways, you can make the logic flexible. So let's take, for example, you're configuring an Apache web server. You might have a statement that says put the Apache package on, and then put the configuration on, and then start the service. Well, what happens if some point in time that Apache package version changes? So if you have in your logic install the Apache package, but then you have in data the version of the package, it means that the logic can stay fixed, and all you have to do is change the data. And over time, you can keep changing the data, and the logic will behave the same. And you can do that with any configuration management tool. And that's where things like storing your configuration management logic and data in version control systems, or source control management, as some people call it. So things like Subversion and Git. One of the recommendations we always make is always store your playbooks in source control management, because you get history and things like that with it. It's a really good way of managing a system over time. And also, if you design your logic in a certain way, you can move backwards and forwards through time. So you could build a server from, say, June 2017, or you could build a server from May 2015 if it's all in version control and the logic and the data sticks together. Of course, coupling those things up, you then want to have audit trails based on that. Ansible, if people don't know, is an open source project. All of the functionality is free. So when you go and install Ansible, you can just use all that functionality. It's there. Great. Don't have to pay a penny for it. When you want to extend it to a large-scale organization like you're talking about, the logical approach then is to look at our commercial product called Tower. Tower sits on top of Ansible Core and brings about all of those control elements you're talking about. So what we then get is role-based access control, credential stores, so SSH keys, username and passwords. Ansible also talks to Windows, so WinRM, so credentials for that. They can be put into Tower, they're stored encrypted, and then you can't take them out. But then what you can do is delegate the credential to people to be able to do their jobs. So what Tower then brings is this ability to give people access to what they need access to be able to do all the jobs they need to do, but brings about an audit trail with it, management of those credentials, all of that sort of groovy enterprise stuff that we know we have to do as part of regulation and just generally good business practices and stuff like that. So Ansible has all the functionality to be able to do that as well. There's also encryption in the open source side of it as well. There's a small product called Vault, which lets you put sensitive data in there. So let's say, for example, you're configuring a service, and the service has a username and password attached to it that has to go into a configuration file. That can be stored in Ansible Vault, AES 256 encrypted. You can then put that into your version control system, GitHub or whatever, and it doesn't matter. AWS keys and things like that. GitHub are really, really good at detecting when somebody commits an AWS secret, for example, and they will mail you and say, do you know you're exposing your entire infrastructure by accident here? I've seen it happen a number of times. The nice thing about Ansible Vault is that you don't do that sort of thing, because you can Vault encrypt your AWS stuff and put it into GitHub, and it doesn't matter. Nobody's getting to it. So that's another nice little belt and braces bit of functionality.
Yeah, I think Tower, giving you the ability to sort of to make environment provisioning and a configuration, etc., to your developers or your testers, so that they can just do it on demand. Rock in, hit a button, and you're quite, the system admins are quite happy because they know exactly what it's going to do. It comes back to the state thing. It is just incredibly powerful and changes the way that the developers really can, and testers can, the speed at which they can do it, in the order, the sequence, etc., that they can get that, do their jobs very, as quickly as possible that way.
You can actually bring about sort of the DevOps culture as well. You can encourage the DevOps culture through that kind of workflow as well, in that you could have an operations team write their Ansible playbooks to provision a server, configure it, put code on and things like that, then have a simple little form in Tower, what's called a survey, and the form can just be a simple point and click, right, provision me a new server. You can delegate that access to developers. They can just get on with their jobs. They don't need to worry about what that code's going to look like, because they know that their colleagues in ops, whose job it is to make sure that stuff is stable and trustworthy and everything, they've done it. And so you bring about that DevOps culture actually through that really nice, that simple technology implementation there. And that's exactly what Tower is designed for too.
Yeah, and you get that kind of, the cost saving of not standing up tech for a while. Otherwise, the scheduling, all that sort of area of it. The amount of time we waste doing things like scheduling, for example. We don't need to do any scheduling if it's on demand. You can just rock up and get it when you want. So it's not this kind of, we're going to be starting test in 4 days' time. And last time it took 3 days to get my environment and everything built. So I'll ask for it now, and that might mean it's standing up for a day and sat there with nothing going on. But who cares? That's all right, as long as we're ready for that day 4. And then you don't test till day 7, and you've had it stood up there for 8, costing you money. It's just all that sort of stuff that the on-demand model really, really kind of brings in. I guess it almost sounds a bit too good to be true, all this. So let's talk about the catches, really. I guess. I've seen certainly before we kind of get some resistance initially for adoption. People have the usual fears of automation.
Where's my job going?
The robots are coming to steal my job. But I think also it's about the risk of kind of being exposed technically. People don't. They've established themselves within their organisation, and suddenly. Someone else might learn this a bit quicker than they do, or whatever. And they're usually completely unfounded fears. But what are the key barriers that you've seen to adoption over the years, and when you're in the field, and what are your tips for kind of getting over those?
Yeah, I think that talk that I gave, the migrating the wrong book one, part of what I talk about actually right at the beginning of that is. Automation's always been key to my career, right from the very beginning, and I've never understood why people wouldn't want to automate. But then I stopped and started to think about this for a while, and I thought, why aren't people automating? And I pretty much came across 4 reasons for people not choosing to do automation. One of them was it's too hard. That's a tooling problem. So if it's too hard, then the tool isn't easy enough to use, and people don't want to do it. I remember sitting in a hedge fund once, and there were some guys that were really reticent to adopt automation because they'd got used to their jobs. They knew what they were doing. They knew how it worked and everything. I did the quick install of Ansible for them in the few seconds that it took. And I said to the guy, give me a server. Let's do something. And I ran Ansible on the command line just to go and do a PS minus EF on the server. And he was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. I said, give me another 5 more servers. So he gives me the 5 more servers. And we did the same thing again and hit the whole 5 again. And then his face lit up as he realized, actually, this is really easy. This is really simple. So there was an example of, it's not too hard when the tool is right. Yeah. The next thing was, I see people just go, oh, it's just faster if I just type it. And you'll get somebody, oh, I need to make this quick change on a server. Let's just go and type this quickly, and then it's done. Yeah, of course. The thing is with that,
I'll do the automation later kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no such thing as a temporary solution in IT. we all know about things. Right, look, we'll just do this for the next half an hour, and then 10 years later, this server is still sitting there running in a data center, and nobody knows what it does. So that's just a fallacy. And I think as the world adopts this cattle versus pets mentality more towards their servers, as servers become more ephemeral, as things move faster and we need to do this stuff quicker, we will stop managing servers by just saying, I'll type this, it's quicker. I once designed an automated infrastructure for a client, and this was way before Ansible existed, so I actually did this with Puppet. And I made it really easy for people to be able to make a change and code commit. The commit hit the Puppet master almost immediately, and then be implemented on the server at the next time it was run. People actually stopped managing servers locally. They managed the infrastructure by changing the Puppet manifest there on their own little workstation and committing it to the version control. That whole sort of DevOps culture was brought about by making it really easy for people to do it. So I think that's another one that's easy sort of to quash. Was the other one? The speed of entry. I mean, that's the sort of, people will say, oh, it's just faster if I go and do it. But that's the same as the tooling thing. The tool isn't right for the job. But the most common thing that I see is people do fear for their job. They think, right, if I automate away my bit of job here, then what happens to me? And I think to an extent that's a fallacy as well. Yes, you're going to get some organizations that are trying to do staff reduction and things like that. That is going to happen. Let's be honest. But a lot of the time, what you're trying to do is augment yourself. You're trying to make yourself be able to do more. Yeah. Look at Google. They had, I'm sure everybody knows about Google's 80-20 rule, where 80% of your time is spent doing the job that you're supposed to be doing. 20% of your time, a whole day of your week, is free for you to go and look at anything that interests you. And they saw the benefit of this as bringing about new things for their business. Gmail, what else? I think Google Maps and stuff.
Google Maps.
They all came out of this 20% rule. So if you give people the ability to automate, they can get some of their time back to be able to innovate. And I think this is one of the things that businesses are starting to realize as well. Is like, hang on a second, let's let people get some of their time back, and let's see where we can push our technology, and let's see how we can help our own business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always talk about saying, well, actually doing some of this stuff, because it's repetitive and because it's repetitive in a following instructions kind of way. So you don't get better at it. In fact, you get lazier and you make more mistakes just because you get bored, right? Whereas if you're doing a drill, if you're repeating, you regularly hold a fire drill, then you get better at the fire drill, and you'll keep getting better as you go through that. And I think that's where the sort of one of the things that I always talk to people about is say, well, how about those operations guys, the guys that have been pulling together these things, they get more time to work on making the actual overall IT estate more resilient. So the kind of anti-fragile type things, they have time to purposely stress the system and start working on those things. So it's I guess it's like any change, isn't it? To some people it's liberating and an enabler, and to other people it's not. And I guess over time, we should see the people who don't find change sort of liberating and see the opportunities will sort of dwindle, because they'll make themselves redundant, not for that job, but their skills become, they're not needed anymore.
Change is constant. We don't. Exactly. The tech industry is something that changes all the time. It is, and it isn't necessarily things. We're not necessarily doing things new. We're just doing things better. We're just improving things all the time. Automation a lot of the time is about getting some time back to improve your life, to improve a business or whatever. All of the focus at the minute on automating cars, so having self-driving cars. A lot of the media focuses on the scary aspects of it, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of, let's stop killing people with cars, let's let them do all the kind of stuff. But there's another angle to it, which is one of getting time back. All these people who have 2-hour commutes and things like that, 2-hour commutes are not unknown in the US, for example. But if you've got 2 hours of driving, what if you can sit back, let the car do the driving? You've got 2 hours to get work done. 2 hours to get other things, rather than just sitting there staring at somebody else's bumper on their car. There's a real advantage to improving life through automation as well. And if you make it simple and easy, change isn't so difficult to adopt. People don't like change when it becomes a friction to their life. When it's really, really hard for them to make that change, people will resist. You make it dead easy, you make it simple, and change actually comes very easily.
Yeah, so I guess speaking about that, so we've sold the idea and concept of automation platforms to everybody now. If they still needed persuading in the first place, but so somebody wanting to get started with Ansible specifically, is there a community? How do they kind of get started? What would your advice be there?
Yeah. So one of the wonderful things about Ansible that I discovered firsthand very early on is how good the community is and how cheerful it is. We know, anybody who's used open source software will probably be well aware that at some point or another you'll drop into an IRC channel and you'll go and ask a newbie question and you'll get flamed down and people will be rude to you, and that's no good. There's none of that in the Ansible community. The Ansible IRC channel now, there must be about 1,500 people on it, and it's still a really friendly, cheerful, happy place. So Freenode, #Ansible, great place to go and ask questions. Google Groups, there is the Ansible project mail list. Again, really nice place. Go and ask questions. Newbie questions are absolutely fine. Ansible.com is a brilliant resource. The documentation was always good with Ansible from the start, because Ansible's modular architecture, each and every module that does a little tiny job, like puts a file into place, starts a service or whatever, has documentation built into it. You can't put an Ansible module into the core distribution without it having the documentation in. So the entire thing is self-documented. docs.ansible.com, really good place. Ansible.com/get-started. Get started, really good place to go. So that's somewhere well worth looking at. Ansible.com/blog, loads and loads of good blog posts there. Informative, we try to give people real world scenarios. If you search through the blog for any of my posts, for example, there's a blog post there I wrote called Ansible as Automation Glue. And I actually show a code deployment, building a server up, deploying it on VMware, using Jenkins to test the code. Basically that developer scenario that you talked about, I showed giving a new developer workstation in 2 minutes. So lots and lots of good resources like that. Ansible.com is the best place to start, and then that will lead you off down all the other paths as well.
Yeah, and I suppose the other area, a load to get started already, but I guess the other thing that I mentioned is it would be Galaxy, with some keen browsing in there, it can make you look good very quickly.
Very, 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 very good point. So galaxy.ansible.com is a great resource for finding existing roles. Roles are a way to do something. So you could have an Apache role, an Nginx role, a Java role, and they will implement these things for you. And it saves you writing playbooks. A role basically is an encapsulation of a playbook, and then other bits and bobs to it. Ansible.com/get-started will explain that nicely. But Galaxy, fantastic place. Just you can often find a role to do a job that you want to do to save you having to reinvent the wheel. good place to go and look. Thank you for reminding me about that.
No, it's just, like I say, you can look very good very quickly. Like that.
Good call.
So I guess, what's the future for Ansible then? What's the community working on at the moment? What are the big bets that Red Hat are pushing? Where's it going?
So one of the great things about Ansible that I mentioned early on in our chat was its modular nature, and the fact that it was written from the start to be really quite extensible and easily extensible as well. Ansible at its heart is basically a task runner, and all you do is you just keep giving it tasks to do, and offer it goes and does them. It's all built around this toolbox of modules. Each and every single module is designed to do a job and do it well. Put something into a state that you want it to be in, a desired state. Over time, that modules list has expanded massively as the community has realized what it could do. So we started out looking at servers. People realized that actually you could talk to network equipment. And all of a sudden, vendors started to write modules to manage network equipment. When I first started using Ansible back in 2013, I think there were about 60 modules in the distribution then. In the distribution today, there are 950 modules. On the command line, if you go ansible-doc-l, it will list all the modules. It's really nice. You can go ansible-doc-l, pipe through grep, and then something like Cisco or something, and you'll find all the Cisco modules, for example. Docs.ansible.com also lists them as well, because of course it's built from the code. I can just see people just continuing to use this extensibility to get creative with the way that they do things. At Ansible Fest next week, I think James Camerata will be giving one of his usual very, very interesting demonstrations of how extensible and flexible Ansible is. I don't know whether he'll give the same one that he usually gives, but one that he's given in the past. And if you go to ansible.com/webinars and look through there, you'll find his talk from the Ansible Automate series, where he automates a bunch of Philips Hue lights. So he shows how to write an Ansible module, how simple it can be. And then on stage, he has a bunch of lights and he controls them, changes the color and all this kind of stuff and everything. And I think showing Ansible's power like that is, that's the things that we'll see. Tower is going to continue to go from strength to strength. It's not just a control plane as such, not just role-based access control and things like that. It's actually now becoming a workflow engine. So in the last version of the product, in 3.1 that's out now, we put something there called workflows that enabled you to do drag and drop of handling scenarios. So let's say you've got a playbook that runs and something fails, you can make it branch off to a failure branch, but if it succeeds, you can make it branch off to a success branch. And I think Tower going ahead is just going to continue to grow up as a workflow tool like that. Our networking story is getting massive this year as well. Ansible Fest has got a whole track on networking now, because all of the major network vendors are now submitting Ansible modules and working with us to automate their kit. You imagine being able to sit in your organization and use Ansible to build your servers, configure your servers, configure the networks that are underneath and around them, deploy your code. And then when you realize that you can do this across the whole lot and have Ansible as an orchestrator to fit over all of these elements, you realize the power of a readable playbook that everybody can read. You can do all this implementation, these building of things, and then even a security team, an audit team. Anybody can understand this kind of stuff. There's one thing that I've said to customers countless times in meetings, which can be a scary thing as well. But what I tend to say is you can do anything you want with Ansible. What will stop you is your imagination, not the tech, because it's so extensible. So the wonderful thing is that I can see people just getting more and more creative with what they do with things. See one of Jimmy's talks with his lights. That'll give you an idea. It's such a cool talk the way he does it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll be there on Thursday, so we'll we'll wait and see. Maybe he'll
see when he wheels out next.
Maybe he'll take it up a level. So
you never know.
So with the orchestration, is that sort of starting to compete or do step on the toes of things like Kubernetes?
Yeah, there are a whole other. They're sort of. So that's a different sort of thing. So the thing about containers when they first sort of got all the traction that they did. Containerization is something that's actually quite old. It's an old idea. Solaris were doing zones over 10 years ago. I think FreeBSD jails are even older than that. FreeBSD jails are essentially just an extension of Chroot. These are old technologies in Unix. These go back many, many, many years. And when containers first came about, the thing that was so difficult about them was getting them to talk to one another and having network layers that talk to them and pulling them together to build up the bigger picture, because containers are designed again for that modern way of thinking. So microservices is a big deal, the idea of breaking up your code into smaller little chunks, but then orchestrating them all together. And that's what Kubernetes is designed to do, is sort of help with all that stuff with containers. Now, I think there are use cases where just using Kubernetes to do that for your containers makes more sense than taking it out to Ansible. A little while ago, somebody did write a Kubernetes module for Ansible. So you could have an Ansible playbook that can then control Kubernetes, that then can do that part. So this is that's orchestration for a given point, whereas I think Ansible is orchestration for a much, much bigger picture. And that's, again, that's going to be sort of, context sensitive type things. You just, there's going to be a case where it's better to use Ansible straight to talk to containers, which is why we've got Ansible Container, which is then talking to OpenShift. But then you're going to have scenarios where you're probably just going to want to deal with just some containers, and maybe Kubernetes is the better answer for it and things like that. Context is all, but again, we can control that point too.
Oh yeah, well, I could talk to you all day. So I suspect I've drastically overrun, and David will tell me off. But it's been really fantastic to pick your brains, Mark, and to go through that. So it's been really interesting for me. Well, hopefully bump into you at Ansible Fest on Thursday. Hopefully we'll put the questions out, and we'll see. Well, we'll see how many people we can tear away from the bar on the night, along with the global DevOps chat crowd. So that'll be great. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. It was really enjoyable.